After 30 years handling lab protocols, the new director said I was too strict and forced me out. The call came at 5:23 a.m. on a Monday. "Stephen, we need you back immediately." I would be lying if I said that I wasn't waiting for this call, but the incidents leading to this call is nothing short of extraordinary. But before that, a small backstory is necessary. 30 years, 3 decades of sterile technique, quality assurance, and protocol development at Prescient Global Tech. I'd started as a junior lab technician in 1994, fresh out of my chemistry PhD, when the company was just beginning to transition from generic drug manufacturing to cutting-edge biotechnology research. Back then, we had 12 employees and 1 small lab. Now we were a publicly traded pharmaceutical giant with facilities across 3 continents. I'd watched every evolution, every expansion, every breakthrough. More importantly, I'd written the safety protocols that made it all possible. Every procedure manual, every contamination prevention system, every quality control checkpoint had been designed, tested, and refined by my hands. The lab safety standards that other companies paid consultants millions to develop, I'd built them from scratch, one careful step at a time. My office was a testament to methodical precision. Protocol binders organized by department and procedure type, incident reports filed chronologically, audit results cataloged by severity and resolution status. I maintained master databases tracking every contamination event, every protocol violation, every near miss that could have destroyed months of research. The walls were covered with certifications, FDA compliance awards, industry safety recognitions, peer review publications on laboratory best practices. Colleagues called me meticulous, some said obsessive. The younger scientists whispered that I was a relic from a more paranoid era, but I'd seen what happened when protocols broke down. I'd witnessed promising drug candidates destroyed by a single contaminated sample, watched clinical trials collapse because someone took shortcuts with sterile procedure. In pharmaceutical research, good enough isn't good enough, it's catastrophic. My protocols had saved Prescient millions of dollars and countless months of lost research time. Every procedure I'd written was battle-tested, refined through years of real-world application and failure analysis. When other companies experienced major contamination events, their executives called me for advice. When the FDA needed examples of industry best practices, they cited our lab management systems, but apparently, 3 decades of expertise wasn't enough for the new generation of leadership. "Stephen, we need to discuss your approach to lab management." Dr. Marcus Hoffman had been our new research director for exactly 8 weeks. He'd come from a Silicon Valley biotech startup with big ideas about disrupting pharmaceutical development and eliminating bureaucratic friction from scientific discovery. The warning signs had been there from day one. His office looked like a tech company conference room: glass walls, modern furniture, multiple monitors displaying real-time research data, everything designed to convey innovation and speed. "The board wants to accelerate our development timelines," he said, "not bothering with small talk. More flexible protocols, faster approvals, less administrative overhead." "Flexible protocols create contamination risks," I replied, settling into the minimalist chair across from his desk. "Our current procedures have protected us from breakthrough discoveries," he interrupted. "Your rigid approach is slowing down innovation. We need protocols that can adapt quickly, procedures that don't paralyze scientists with excessive caution." I'd heard variations of this speech from every new executive who thought they could revolutionize pharmaceutical research by ignoring fundamental safety principles. "Dr. Hoffman, I've been managing lab protocols for 30 years. The procedures I've developed aren't rigid, they're protective." His smile was condescending. "That's exactly the problem, Stephen. You're applying 1990s thinking to 2025 science. We need protocols that embrace calculated risk-taking in pharmaceutical research. Calculated risks involve human lives," I said, quietly. "Science needs freedom to innovate," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Your protocols are holding back our most promising researchers. Dr. Elizabeth Torres in oncology says your contamination procedures add 3 days to every experiment cycle. Those 3 days prevent months of lost research when samples get contaminated." He waved my concern away. "We've hired Dr. Jennifer Yang from BioNova Labs to modernize our protocol management. She's developed streamlined procedures that maintain safety while eliminating unnecessary bottlenecks." The name hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer Yang had been fired from BioNova after a contamination incident destroyed 18 months of Alzheimer's research. The industry knew her as someone who prioritized speed over safety, who'd built a reputation on cutting corners that other scientists were afraid to cut. Dr. Hoffman, Jennifer Yang was terminated from BioNova for challenging outdated thinking, he interrupted. "Exactly the kind of innovative mindset we need here. Stephen, I'm going to be direct with you. Your approach to lab management is too strict, and frankly, you're not up for the kind of scientific freedom our researchers need." The words hung in the air like chemical fumes. 30 years of protecting human subjects, safeguarding research, integrity, and preventing catastrophic failures dismissed as being too strict. I stood up slowly, gathering my dignity along with my composure. I understand completely. I walked to the door without another word. Some arguments aren't worth having, especially when the other person has already decided that expertise is the enemy of progress. The first month of forced retirement was disorienting. After 3 decades of 12-hour days managing critical lab operations, I found myself wandering my house at dawn, unsure what to do with the sudden abundance of time. The severance package was generous 9 months' salary plus benefits, which suggested either guilt or nervousness about something. My replacement had arrived with impressive credentials and terrible judgment. Dr. Jennifer Yang brought with her a philosophy of adaptive protocols and risk-optimized procedures that sounded innovative in presentation slides but terrifying to anyone who understood laboratory realities. I'd met her briefly during the transition, watching her dismiss my protocol manuals as unnecessarily conservative and impediments to scientific agility. Old habits die hard, and I found myself monitoring industry publications obsessively. That's when I noticed the first concerning pattern. Prescient had announced an accelerated timeline for their Alzheimer's drug candidate, promising phase 3 results 6 months ahead of schedule. The press release emphasized their innovative approach to protocol efficiency and streamlined safety procedures. Then I saw the personnel announcements. 3 senior lab technicians had left Prescient within 2 weeks, experienced professionals who'd worked under my protocols for years. These weren't people who quit lightly. They were the kind of methodical, careful scientists who understood that pharmaceutical research couldn't be rushed without consequences. I told myself it wasn't my concern anymore. But 30 years of protecting research integrity doesn't just switch off because someone thinks your standards are too high. The industry rumors started circulating by month 2. Prescient was experiencing unusual contamination events in their oncology division. A promising cancer therapy had been delayed due to technical complications. Dr. Torres, the same researcher who'd complained about my 3-day contamination procedures, had reportedly lost 6 months of work to bacterial contamination that could have been prevented by proper sterile technique. I've started tracking the pattern, not out of malice but from professional curiosity. When you've spent 3 decades preventing disasters, you develop an instinct for recognizing the warning signs. The call came from Dr. Patricia Williams, my former deputy, and the only person in the lab safety department who'd stayed in touch. We met at a coffee shop near the university, far from Prescient's corporate campus. "It's complete chaos, Stephen," she said, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "Jennifer's rewritten every major protocol. She says our old procedures were scientifically unnecessary and that modern labs should operate with intelligent flexibility. What does that mean in practice?" She's eliminated mandatory decontamination periods, reduced sterile field requirements, and allowed researchers to modify safety procedures based on their individual scientific judgment. Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. "The Torres lab contamination. That was just the beginning." I felt my chest tighten. "How bad is it?" 3 major contamination events in 6 weeks. The Alzheimer's trial samples are showing inconsistent results that nobody can explain. And the new cancer therapy protocol, half the cell cultures are showing bacterial overgrowth that's compromising all the efficacy data. "What about the FDA inspections?" Patricia's face went pale. "That's next month. Jennifer says she's confident our modernized approaches will impress the inspectors. She's prepared a presentation about how we're leading the industry in protocol innovation." I nearly choked on my coffee. The FDA doesn't care about innovation. They care about consistent, reproducible results generated under controlled conditions. "Stephen, it gets worse," Patricia continued. "The executives love her. Hoffman's been telling the board that research productivity has never been higher. They're moving faster, completing experiments in half the time, because she's eliminated the safety margins that prevent catastrophic failures. Dr. Rodriguez in immunology asked me if you'd consider consulting on a contamination issue they're having. Unofficially, of course." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "No, they made their choice. I'm too strict, remember?" But as I drove home that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about the researchers who'd spent years building their careers on reliable data, only to watch their work compromised by inadequate safety protocols. These weren't just professional setbacks. Pharmaceutical research failures meant delayed treatments for desperate patients. I found myself pulling out my old incident reports, looking up the contamination patterns that had historically preceded major laboratory disasters. The signs were all there: accelerated timelines, relaxed procedures, overconfident leadership dismissing safety concerns as unnecessary paranoia. 3 weeks later, I read about Prescient's stock price dropping 8% after unexpected delays in their phase 3 Alzheimer's trial. The official statement mentioned data quality issues requiring additional analysis. In pharmaceutical language, that meant contamination had compromised their results. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick about the patients who'd been counting on that treatment. The first regulatory action came on a Wednesday in December. The FDA issued a warning letter to Prescient Global Tech, citing significant deviations from current good manufacturing practices, and inadequate contamination control procedures. I learned about it from a former colleague who'd moved to a competing company. Stephen, you need to see this, Dr. Michael Torres said, forwarding me a copy of the FDA letter. They're citing failures in sterile technique, inadequate environmental monitoring, and insufficient contamination investigation procedures. Everything you used to manage. I read through the document with growing horror. The FDA had identified systemic problems in 3 separate research divisions, including cross-contamination between supposedly isolated experiments and bacterial growth in supposedly sterile cell cultures. The violations weren't minor technical issues, they were fundamental breakdowns in laboratory safety that threatened the integrity of every study being conducted. But the real catastrophe was buried in the technical details. The FDA had put a clinical hold on Prescient's Phase 3 Alzheimer's trial after discovering that contamination had compromised the stability of the drug compound itself. 24 months of clinical research, involving 800 patients across multiple sites, had been invalidated because someone had decided that contamination protocols were unnecessarily conservative. The stock price dropped 18% in a single trading session. 2 days later, Dr. Rodriguez from Immunology called me directly. Stephen, we need to talk, off the record. We met at a restaurant across town, far from anywhere we might encounter Prescient employees. Rodriguez looked like he'd aged years in just a few months. The contamination in my lab isn't random, he said quietly. Someone replaced our HEPA filtration system with a cheaper alternative that doesn't meet our contamination specifications. Jennifer approved it as a cost optimization measure. How long ago? 6 weeks. Right after she eliminated the mandatory air quality testing that would have caught the problem immediately. I felt my blood pressure rising. What's the extent of the contamination? 18 months of cancer immunotherapy research gone. We can't use any of the data, because we can't verify that the results weren't influenced by bacterial contamination. The magnitude hit me like a physical blow. 18 months of research represented millions of dollars in direct costs, but more importantly, it meant delays in treatments that could save lives. Cancer patients don't have the luxury of waiting for research teams to repeat experiments that were ruined by preventable contamination. There's more, Rodriguez continued. The investors are getting nervous. The quarterly board meeting is next week, and rumor is that some major shareholders are demanding answers about the research delays. Where's Hoffman in all this? That's the interesting part. He's been unavailable for the last 2 weeks. Word is he's in discussions with other companies about new opportunities. Of course, he was the same executive who dismissed 30 years of safety expertise was now preparing to abandon ship rather than face the consequences of his decisions about scientific freedom. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the patients whose treatments would be delayed, all the researchers whose careers would be damaged, all the investors who'd lose money because someone thought safety protocols were obstacles to innovation. But mostly, I thought about the phone call that would inevitably come. The phone rang at 5:23 a.m. on a Monday morning in January. I was making coffee when I saw Dr. Amanda Chen's name on my caller ID. Amanda was Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, the same person who'd implemented my contamination protocols across all research divisions and had fought to keep me when Hoffman first arrived. Stephen, we need you back immediately. Her voice was barely controlled panic, professional composure cracking under enormous pressure. The entire Phase 3 trial is contaminated, and the FDA is threatening to shut us down permanently. Nobody can find the decontamination protocols. I set down my coffee mug, my hand surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what she was telling me. What's the contamination source? We don't know. Jennifer eliminated the contamination tracking systems you'd developed, saying they were administratively burdensome. Now we have bacterial overgrowth in multiple labs, cross-contamination between supposedly isolated experiments, and no systematic way to identify the source. How extensive is the damage, Stephen? It's catastrophic. The Alzheimer's drug samples are completely compromised. The cancer immunotherapy data is unreliable. Even our basic research protocols are showing contamination markers that nobody knows how to interpret. I walked to my home office, looking at the protocol manuals I'd never bothered to pack away. 30 years of institutional knowledge sitting on shelves because someone thought safety was the enemy of progress. Where's Jennifer Yang? She submitted her resignation Friday afternoon, said the contamination problems were due to unforeseeable equipment failures and that she couldn't be held responsible for random laboratory accidents. Random laboratory accidents. I laughed bitterly. There's nothing random about contamination when you eliminate the protocols designed to prevent it. The board of directors is meeting this afternoon. Stephen, we're looking at potential bankruptcy. The FDA violations alone could result in hundreds of millions in fines. Add in the lost research costs, the delayed drug approvals, and the shareholder lawsuits, and we might not survive this. I sat down heavily in my desk chair, surrounded by the evidence of 3 decades spent preventing exactly this scenario. Amanda, what exactly are you asking me to do? Come back. Full authority over all laboratory safety protocols, emergency consultant status with whatever compensation you want. And if I say no, the pause was long enough to confirm what I already knew. Then a company that spent 30 years developing life-saving treatments dies because we thought safety protocols were optional. She knew exactly how to appeal to my sense of responsibility. But I'd learned something important during my months of forced retirement. Sometimes the only way to prove the value of expertise is to let people experience its absence. I'll consider it, I said, but I have conditions. Whatever you need. First, I want written acknowledgement from the board that this contamination crisis resulted from abandoning established safety protocols. Second, I want full authority to redesign and implement laboratory procedures without interference from research directors or project managers. Third, I want Jennifer Yang permanently barred from any consulting or employment relationship with Prescient. Stephen, that's non-negotiable. Amanda, you called me because you need someone who's too strict to fix the disaster created by someone who prioritized speed over safety. Either you accept that reality, or you find someone else to manage the bankruptcy proceedings. I could hear papers shuffling, probably contamination reports and FDA correspondence. I'll present your terms to the board. One more thing. I want Hoffman's written acknowledgement that this crisis resulted from his decision to prioritize innovation over proven safety protocols, not for my personal satisfaction for the regulatory record. When the FDA starts assigning blame, I want it clear that this contamination disaster was caused by abandoning professional expertise, not by following it. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the protocol manuals that could have prevented everything. The same strict approaches they'd rejected were now their only hope for regulatory survival. But first, they'd have to admit that scientific freedom without safety protocols isn't innovation, it's professional negligence. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. I arrived carrying 2 large cases, containing every protocol manual, contamination log, and safety procedure I'd developed over 3 decades. The same conference room where Hoffman had dismissed my expertise now felt like a decontamination chamber where I was both the cleanup crew and the expert witness. The board members looked exhausted, faces drawn with the stress of watching their company's reputation collapse in real time. Dr. Amanda Chen sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and regulatory specialists. Hoffman's chair remained empty. He'd officially resigned the day before, citing philosophical differences with the board's risk management approach. Steve and Amanda began. The board has voted unanimously to accept your conditions. We need your help. Before we start, I said, setting my cases on the table, I want everyone to understand exactly what happened here. This wasn't a random contamination event or unforeseeable equipment failure. This was a predictable disaster caused by abandoning proven safety protocols. I opened the first case and began distributing bound documents. This is a comprehensive analysis of every contamination event since my departure. I've identified 37 protocol violations that directly contributed to research failures, including 12 that should have triggered immediate facility shutdowns. Board member Dr. Lisa Park flipped through the pages, her face growing paler with each violation description. How did you compile this? The same systematic approach to contamination tracking that Jennifer Yang eliminated as administratively burdensome. Every contamination event leaves traces, bacterial signatures, environmental markers, procedural deviations. The patterns are obvious if you know how to look for them. I walked to the whiteboard and began sketching a timeline of contamination events. The first major failure occurred 3 weeks after Jennifer eliminated mandatory decontamination periods. The second came when she reduced sterile field requirements. By the time she allowed researchers to modify safety procedures based on personal judgment, catastrophic contamination was inevitable. What's our regulatory exposure? Asked board member Dr. James Morrison. The FDA warning letter is just the beginning. Based on the violation patterns, we're looking at potential criminal charges. For endangering clinical trial subjects, the contaminated Alzheimer's samples could have introduced unknown variables that affected patient safety. The room fell silent, except for the sound of papers rustling and legal counsel taking notes. However, I continued, most of this can still be fixed if we act immediately and comprehensively. I opened the second case and pulled out a thick manual. This is the emergency decontamination protocol I developed after the 2019 contamination event at Biogen Labs. It's designed to systematically identify contamination sources, isolate affected areas, and restore sterile conditions while preserving salvageable research. Amanda leaned forward. How long would full decontamination take? 6 weeks for complete facility sterilization, assuming we start immediately. But we can begin salvaging uncontaminated research within days if we implement proper isolation procedures. Dr. Park was taking notes frantically. What about the FDA investigation? That's actually our advantage. The FDA values systematic contamination response more than they penalize contamination events. If we can demonstrate that we've identified the root causes and implemented comprehensive corrective measures, they're likely to work with us rather than shut us down. I turned back to the board. But here's the critical point. This recovery plan requires absolute commitment to following established protocols. No shortcuts, no innovative flexibility, no compromises with safety procedures. The same strict an approach that was supposedly holding back research is the only thing that can save the company now. Board member Dr. Susan Martinez spoke up. What do you need from us? Complete authority to redesign laboratory operations. I want every researcher retrained on contamination procedures. I want new equipment installed according to my specifications. And I want a board resolution stating that laboratory safety takes precedence over research timelines that could slow down our development schedules significantly, Dr. Morrison warned. Slower than bankruptcy, I asked. Because that's your alternative. You can have fast research that destroys itself through contamination, or you can have methodical research that produces reliable results. You can't have both. Amanda looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member, all in favor of giving Stephen complete authority over laboratory safety recovery. The vote was unanimous. When can you start? She asked. I was already opening my protocol manuals. I started 30 years ago. Give me access to the contaminated facilities, and I'll have a preliminary recovery plan by tomorrow morning. As I walked toward the laboratory complex for the first time in 4 months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my forced retirement, the satisfaction of being absolutely necessary 8 months later. I was sitting in my restored office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of properly organized protocol manuals and contamination tracking systems. The walls displayed new certifications, FDA compliance, restoration, industry safety excellence, and a commendation from the Department of Health for exemplary contamination recovery procedures. My coffee mug reads strictly protecting scientific integrity since 1994. The emergency decontamination had taken exactly 6 weeks. As predicted, we'd identified the contamination sources: compromised air filtration systems, inadequate sterile technique training, and eliminated safety protocols that had previously prevented cross-contamination. More importantly, we'd salvaged 60% of the supposedly lost research by implementing proper isolation and verification procedures. The FDA had not only lifted their clinical hold, but had cited Prescient as a model for contamination response. Our systematic approach to identifying, isolating, and correcting safety violations had impressed the inspectors enough that they'd asked permission to use our protocols as training examples for other pharmaceutical companies. The Alzheimer's trial had resumed with fresh samples and enhanced safety procedures. The cancer immunotherapy research had been rebuilt on a foundation of properly maintained, sterile conditions. Dr. Rodriguez's lab was now producing some of the most reliable research data in the company's history. Jennifer Yang had landed at a smaller biotech company where she could continue her experiments and adaptive protocols. I'd heard through industry contacts that she'd already caused a contamination events in her first quarter. Some people never learn that scientific freedom without safety protocols isn't innovation, it's professional malpractice. Dr. Hoffman had taken a position as chief scientific officer at a venture capital firm specializing in pharmaceutical investments. His LinkedIn profile described him as a visionary leader who accelerates drug development through streamlined research protocols. I'd blocked him on all platforms, but occasionally saw his posts when colleagues shared them as cautionary tales. The real vindication came from an unexpected source. The Journal of Pharmaceutical Research had published a case study titled Contamination Crisis and Recovery, a case study in the critical importance of laboratory safety protocols. They'd interviewed me extensively, and the article had become one of their most cited publications, shared thousands of times with hashtags like #SafetyFirst and #ProtocolsMatter. My favorite quote from the article: "The most dangerous flexibility is the kind that compromises fundamental safety principles." Dr. Patricia Williams knocked on my door, carrying a stack of contamination reports for review. She'd been promoted to Deputy Director of Laboratory Safety after proving herself during the crisis recovery, and she'd shown remarkable skill in applying rigorous safety protocols without stifling legitimate research innovation. "Stephen, the Pharmaceutical Safety Council wants you to present the keynote address at their annual conference. Should I accept on your behalf?" I looked up from the protocol. I was reviewing new procedures for a promising diabetes treatment, complete with multiple contamination checkpoints and sterile technique requirements. Even our most basic research now got the full safety treatment. "Accept it," I said, "but tell them the title has to be why being called to strict is usually a compliment." She smiled and headed back to her desk. I returned to my protocol review, making notes about decontamination procedures and environmental monitoring requirements. The work was exactly the same as it had been 8 months ago, but somehow it felt different. Maybe it was the knowledge that my expertise had been tested under the most extreme circumstances possible, and had proven essential to the company's survival. Or maybe it was simply the satisfaction of proving that 30 years of experience isn't the same as inflexibility. It's the wisdom to know that some corners can never safely be cut. The phone rang, and I saw Amanda Chen's name on the caller ID. Probably another pharmaceutical company asking for consulting help with their own contamination problems. The industry had learned that Prescient's recovery wasn't just luck, it was the result of systematic expertise applied with unwavering precision.